Hey folks, BlackCross here, and welcome to another review. In today's review, we are going to be finally talking about Ghost of Tsushima. So, before we even go into the review itself, I do want to kind of go ahead and preference why I didn't get into Ghost of Tsushima as soon as it came out. And the answer is actually kind of simple, mostly because of what came out before Ghost of Tsushima. There was a bunch of new stuff that came out, and unfortunately for what came out, I was very unimpressed at the time. Whenever I first saw it, back in 2019, 2018, something like that, during Sony's showcase and stuff, I was very impressed with what I saw. It was very, very atmospheric, and I definitely enjoyed what I was seeing. Unfortunately, though, when they got the trailer, another deep trailer for the PlayStation State of Play, they did a whole showcase talking about Ghost of Tsushima and what you can do and stuff like that. During that trailer, though, I was very unimpressed. For starters, number one, the gameplay that was showed before this one, it had a interesting way of showcasing what it was going to look like. In this game, in this State of Play case, though, it was very reminiscent of that of Assassin's Creed. And that was not a good thing to show off. Assassin's Creed for a long time has kind of went on this weird road, and it's kind of been more repetitive, it feels like, in some form of way. And Ghost of Tsushima, when it showed this, it was definitely not a good thing to have. And not only that, but whenever they showcased it, and keep in mind, they showcased it purposely in order to showcase specific stuff. They didn't want to show off everything, they just wanted to show off certain things. What was the whole, being able to explore the world, what you would be doing and everything like that, so on and so forth. But again, the trailer that they had was very unimpressive, and that was the biggest main thing that kind of pushed me back from purchasing Ghost of Tsushima on day one. Another big thing was that there was rumors saying that the gameplay for Ghost of Tsushima was going to play a lot like Dark Souls, where you were going to die very easy and the enemies was going to be nearly impossible to beat. This was kind of going on that trend of where I was I was getting tired of games trying to pick up the trend of being a Souls-like remedy and everything like that. You can be a really good game without it being freaking hard as heck. And unfortunately, the rumor kind of got out of control. And that was whenever I was just kind of like, you know what, I'll wait until sometime later to pick up Ghost of Tsushima. There's really no reason for me to dive into it. But then the game came out, and it made a complete 180 on itself. Completely overnight, it seems. From where people was pushing it back and was just saying how terrible it looks and stuff like that, to all of a sudden people were saying that this was almost as good, if not better, than games like Witcher 3 and Breath of the Wild. And that really impressed me the most, was just how completely out of nowhere it just completely turned the tables on itself. And then, of course, you had the Video Game Awards and everything like that, and it was nominated for Game of the Year. Sadly, that did not happen, though. Instead, it got Best Art Direction, which makes perfect sense. Whenever I was playing the game, I could definitely tell you right now for a fact, it makes sense for why it got that. But as for Game of the Year, I still think it should have gotten that over, The Last of Us Part 2. But that's beside the point. The point is that, Ghost of Tsushima, now that I finally have a chance to play it and finally beaten it and everything like that, what have I thought about the game? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, I was very impressed with it. Very, very impressed with it, actually, in all honesty. So first and foremost, let's talk about the startup of the game, and we're not talking about the startup like the story or everything like that. We're talking more or less like the cinematics, if you will. It is very much, I kid you not, the way it starts, it's literally as though as if you were watching this in a movie theater. And that what's even weirder is that it has an optional setup to where you can choose how you want it to set up. When the game was fixing to come out, they were showcasing of how you can literally make it as though as if it was coming out of the old Japanese samurai movies and stuff. And they definitely hit that hardcore. They definitely delivered it in a way that, again, seems very cinematic. Again, you have all these different options that you have. You have it to where you can change the color scheme to black and white or whatever. You can have the Japanese on to English subtitles, or you can have them speak in an English translation, which, by the way, might I add, I know there's a lot of people who have mixed conceptions about that subject, about English voice actors to Japanese characters and stuff. To me, personally, I prefer to have English voice actors, however way you can do it. But I'm going to tell you right now, the English voice actors in this game are very good, very talented, in fact. In fact, I'm not even sure who any of them are. I don't recognize any of them, but they are some talented people. There were some talented people who was doing voice acting for these characters. They did them perfectly, and they did it with grace, in my personal opinion. They were spot on perfect to delivering how they should be and how they should act. It was very well done, in my personal opinion. But then, of course, you have the audio setup, and this was something that I don't normally see, where you have a game setup, and you set up the audio, and it's one thing to where you can adjust, like, the sound bites, from, like, the sound effects, to the music, to the voice actor, so on and so forth. But in this game case, it went for a full-on different perspective. And on the one hand, I kind of like it, but at the same time, I don't like it, because the audio setup is very unusual. It has a setup in which where you can choose to have it set up for like a home theater feel, to a sound bar even, and even with that of headphones. And I was very confused because I was like, why is it giving me these options? These are definitely options that you would normally never get in a video game, And even if you did, technically, there's no need to do that because you've already had it pre-set up. So why would you have these audio fixed up anyway? As far as I can tell, there's no major difference between these setups, or as far as what I can tell. If nothing else, the audio to me feels very, very, how can I put this? Very low, okay? I've had to actually have and keep in mind, I don't have a sound bar or anything like that. I just have my normal TV. Record is 10 years old now, but that's aside the point. The point is, it has lasted me this long, really good, in good condition, mind ya. Actually, I'm not even sure if it's even 10 years old. It might be actually just 8, but that's beside the point. The point is, I don't have anything set up to it. But I've had to actually have the audio up higher than I normally would. And not to say that it was increasingly high, but to where I normally have it set to like a particular sound setup, all of a sudden I had to turn up the volume because of how this game's audio is set up. It's definitely unusual. Not to say that that's a bad thing. I'm sure for some people it's a different experience, but for me, I found that a bit confusing. So like I said, the setup is a big setup when it comes to Ghost of Tsushima. It definitely wants to set itself up like a samurai movie. And in my personal opinion, from beginning to end, it definitely did that. It definitely represented itself as a samurai movie, but translated in a video game. And in my personal opinion, I think they've done really well with this. Now, when it comes to the main story setup, you have, of course, the story where Jin is trying to take back the island that was taken by the Mongolians. And the funny thing is, I cannot remember the main villain's name. You hear it so much, but it's so unusual of a name, set to Khan or something like that. And I was like, okay, what? He's kind of very forgettable, but he is very dramatic whenever he needs to be. But you don't see him as often, so you're just kind of like forgetting who he is, but at the same time, whenever you see him, all of a sudden you remember what he was and what he's trying to do. He's trying to become his own leader and take over the island in his own reign. But, of course, your overall goal is to stop him and destroy his reign of terror on Tsushima. At the same time, you're trying to help save your uncle who was captured during the first act. And now, during the second act, your uncle finds out that you are now redeeming a name known as the Ghost, and he's a little bit not sure, but at the same time, he still accepts you for being more of a samurai. However, though, in the third act, then he finds out that your true nature of the Ghost goes against the samurai code. And during this whole story prospect, I'm going to tell you right now, At first, I wasn't familiar with the samurai's code. I was understanding to a certain degree of like protecting the innocent and the defenseless, fight against the strong and stuff like that. But the method that they go for when it comes to fighting is unusual, and this game does wonderfully expressing that. It does wonderfully showing, okay, the samurai code, it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense in the sense of like you're trying to throw thousands of lives just to take down one enemy. It's not a good idea to do that, because the Mongolians have all these different weapons and techniques that they use in order to defeat the samurai, and it was what brought them down in the first place. Then you got the ghost, who actually, more or less tries to destroy and break down the Mongolians and their forces, and does that with fear. The samurai, however, fights in a way of honor, which is, of course, to fight them face on, and blade to blade. In the ghost case, is more of an assassin's, more of using fear to destroy them, whether it's by poisoning them, killing them in the dark or whatever. Sort of like that at Batman, but not quite like that. But in a sense, it kind of makes sense given the assassin's set point. And what's really, really done well was the argument between his uncle and Jin. You have the argument of like what is considered to be the old way of the samurai's code versus what needs to be done in order to save thousands of lives. The argument stands, but on both ends you can definitely see the perspective, and it makes sense. I absolutely love how they actually kind of more or less almost broken down the code and explains it in a better way. I definitely and extremely acknowledge it, and I actually have a better understanding now of the samurai's code. And it makes sense. On the other hand, it's completely ludicrous, but it makes sense in terms of being humane in a way. The way whenever you look at it through the ghost, it definitely seems inhumane, but considering that they are the enemy, and considering what all they have done to their island, it makes sense in that way. But at the same time, is it the right way? It does it so well, and it makes so much sense that I can actually understand both ends of the argument. It just, the way they've done it, in my personal opinion, they've nailed it down perfectly. But aside the main story, you also have side stories. You have a total of like five actually, my bad. 5 different character side quests that you can go on and do. You have Yuna, the character who has saved you. You have Kenshi, who happens to be more or less a smuggler slash vendor for the Mongolians and stuff. And you have 2 other masters that Jin helps out in order to avenge their honor. And then, of course, you have this monk who you help out during the second act. These side quests kind of deliver more of a character building for Jin, but also to his connection with other people. And their story perspective are actually pretty cool as well. Personally, I love the monk, just to kind of see through his story, and of how, like, towards the beginning, he's trying to keep up with the monk's honor and stuff, and towards the end, he ends up destroying his own honor for the sake of his own brother, and it's interesting to kind of see that. I definitely love it, but I love the setup for these individual side quests, as well as the main quest. In some cases, they may seem a little bit long, but they're not overly drawn out. They're done really, really well, in my personal opinion. And I think this is actually the best way that they have done when it comes to setting up the story setup for each individual side quest. With Assassin's Creed, you kind of have like this weird transition of all the characters and everything like that, as well as how it's set up. With Ghost of Tsushima, you just have the main quest, and then these other side quests that you can take on should you want to. And it's very, very well done, in my personal opinion. A lot better than I think than what Assassin's Creed done. With Assassin's Creed, you had these weird setup pieces and stuff like that. But with Ghost of Tsushima, it kind of blends in quite nicely, actually. And the cool thing is, they never intervene from the main story. You think to yourself, somehow or another they might interfere with the main story, but it doesn't actually. It kind of blends it into where even if you were to somehow complete these side quests before the main quest is ended, they kind of blend in very well nicely, in my personal opinion. But that's the side quests followed by the main story itself. What about the gameplay? How is the gameplay in Ghost of Tsushima? Well, I have to say, I like the setup for the gameplay better in Ghost of Tsushima than I have in any other game, in my personal opinion, because it kind of represents itself as what you would call, what I say, the experience of growth. When it comes to video games, you kind of have to keep yourself balanced of how you make the game, you know? You kind of have to try to do a way of building a character up, you know? With The Witcher 3, it was using not only his levels, but also, too, to build gens and stuff in order to build Geralt himself. With Breath of the Wild, you have the shrines where whenever you collect the spirit orbs, you can use them to contribute either towards stamina or HP. And then, of course, you know, occasionally either finding armor or weapon or attaining the 4 guardian spirits with their different abilities. With Ghost of Tsushima, it does it almost all in one area, but at the same time, it does it through story progression as well. So when it comes to the character growth, you have 2 ways. You have the main way, which is of course through story layout, where you go from beginning to end of the story, and you're attaining new tools and abilities and stuff to help you go through the entire area. But then you have the second phase, where basically you're getting your level up. And as you're attaining level points and skill points and stuff like that, you contribute them towards 3 different attributes. With the samurai, it's basically how the fight goes out, you know, whether it's to parry or to execute a particular way and stuff. With the stands, you have the different stands that you use in this game. You have earth, wind, fire, and water, and these different setup actually more or less contributes a different way in which you're going to combat against the Mongolians. With the earth stands, you have, you know, your normal blade techniques. With the wind, you have against shielded enemies. The water allows you to go against those that have spears, and then one other one which allows you to go against bigger enemies. And these particular stands actually do really nicely, not only in terms of fighting the normal enemies, but also too when you go into these dual stands against different enemies. And this particular setup, in my personal opinion, has got to be probably the best way in terms of executing, both in terms of regular combat versus what I normally would classify as like your bosses in the game. They are done well done, in my personal opinion. And then, of course, you have the ghost stands, which basically allows you to use your different tools and your different weapons that you have in order to go into combat with stealth. And in my personal opinion, these 3 individual stances, as well as these 3 individual skills, help grow Jin, both in terms of how he will go about in normal combat versus how he's going to execute in terms of sneaking into each individual Mongolian stronghold. And in my personal opinion, this building block alone sets up Ghost of Tsushima in the best way it possibly can. You know, when you first start off the game, you are a broken samurai. You are a broken man, and you barely have anything to go against the Mongolians. But as you're going through the main story, or as you're going through doing different side quests and stuff, and leveling up and attaining skill points in order to contribute towards your skills and everything like that, you are growing as both as a character, but also too as the ghost himself. So really, when you think about this, you have this perfect building block with these different skills and everything, and it contributes perfectly. It contributes it beautifully, and it does it really well. But what really does it really well is, of course, the dual stands, or what I like to classify them as like your bosses, because they do it in a different way compared to how the main combat is. The main combat, you don't really have a lock on screen. Wherever you're going to be pointing the blade at, that's where it's going to be aiming at, you know. And it's kind of an interesting setup, at the same time kind of weird, but it kind of works. It really works, actually, to his advantage. Whereas in these dual stands, these dual combats, where you're facing off one single opponent, and the weird thing is, too, you think to yourself, oh, he just has this one type of setup, I need to switch over to just that one stance, right? Actually, no. That's the cool part about it. You can actually switch in between stands and use them accordingly, because if you stick to one stance alone, the enemy will actually be smart enough to be defensive against that particular stance. So you need to be active about switching between stands in order to fight against your opponent, which is beautiful in my personal opinion. You know, it's not really hard in the sense of difficulty, it's hard in the sense of not understanding your opponent. And I think that's what the difficulty thing was supposed to be, was that it was supposed to be difficulty in the sense of you actually have to study your opponent. You have to study how their moveset's going to be, how they're going to react, when they're going to react, and what you need to counter with. This is actually probably the best thing that they have done, you know, and even though it has a difficulty settings, even if you were to put this on the highest difficulty settings, you could be powerful enough to overpower any obstacle so long as you are careful and you are strategic in your moveset when going into combat. And again, these dual combats are the best way when it comes to representing the particular game itself. It is done beautifully, it is done artistically, and in the best way, in my personal opinion, probably the funnest part that I love about in the game. That, and also too, whenever you're going against individual Mongolian strongholds, taking them down and everything like that, is probably the funnest thing I've ever had. In fact, towards the end of the game, where I was actually having all the tools in my access and stuff, I had the most fun using all of my tools to my arsenal. You know, at first I was a little bit hesitant of using each individual tool because I was afraid that if I just used all of them, I wouldn't be able to fight against the Mongolians in any way I could. When in reality, you should not hesitate using all of your tools in your arsenal, whether it be the kunai blades, the sticky bombs, the smoke bombs, the flaming blade, whatever form of weaponry and artillery you have, use them to your advantage, because you will find out real quickly that you get a lot of them just by either picking them from the enemy's corpses to getting them throughout the entire stronghold itself. Just in genuine, you shouldn't have to worry about hiding from using your arsenal, because really, in all honesty, that's actually the fun part, is knowing how to outsmart a massive army of Mongolians that is coming after you and destroying the entire army in a single instant. It's just, oh my gosh, whenever I saw people posting up on Twitter, them taking out teams of Mongolian soldiers in just one single stance, you know, you have your setup, you know, whenever you're stand up against like 3 or 4 individual soldiers and you cut them down in one swing, then you go for the main army. And then as you're fighting this army, you can use your kunai to throw them off. You use your individual stances in order to take out different soldiers. You can use the sticky bombs, or if you're smart enough, use a smoke bomb to chain up assassin kills up to like 3 different enemies. And this alone makes it so much more engaging than what Assassin's Creed could ever hope to deliver. It does it so well, and without any complication whatsoever. It's just a matter of leveling up Jin and understanding individual tools and setups and how you can use them. This is done so well, and in my personal opinion, this is the Assassin's Creed game we wanted. Much less the samurai game we wanted. This is just the perfect balance of a game in my personal opinion. Does it so well. But aside from the main quest, the side quest, and the gameplay, what about the smaller details? Well, that's actually pretty interesting, because while they aren't the main contributors, they kind of help build up Jin in a different way. You know, you have the fact that you find the individual hot springs, which helps maximizes Jin HP. You have the fox dens, where the fox leads you to a little shrine, to where you can build up your resolve. Then you have the bamboo cutting training areas, where if you successfully do this, you build up your resolve even more so still. And then, of course, even still more, whenever you're going around exploring the area and stuff like that, you find different items, you know, such as bamboo shoots, yin wood, lint cloth, leather, fabrics, boar hides, and stuff like that. All of this contributes to building up Jin's artillery, you know, whether it's like sharpening up the blade, increasing the bow's power, or building up the defensive armor in each individual armor that you're going to be wearing, followed by the boar hides themselves. Whenever you get enough, you can upgrade them to increase the maximum amount of artillery you can create in each individual category. In other words, you can increase your overall inventory for your arrows, your your ghost tools, and all that stuff. You know, you can build up the ghost even more so through these individual small stuff just by gathering materials. And then of course, again, with these armor pieces, you can change the color in almost all of the individual armor pieces. Each individual armor has a set color stance that you can customize in your own way. Not as fluid as the way they've described it, but enough to where it gives you that freedom that you want, you know. In the game, you can either continue looking like a Ronin, or you can look like a complete badass samurai, or you can just mix and match and just throw in a weird random character build, however way you want to do it. And in my personal opinion, this is actually pretty fun on its own, but not as creative as I would have liked to have, but it's still pretty cool on its own should you have time enough to explore the world, get all of these individual different stuff and everything like that. And it kind of does well. It's not as in depth that I would have liked to have been, but it's still really fun just to find all of these different weapon pieces, all of these different tools and stuff in order to build up Jin into the ultimate samurai or the ultimate assassin, depending on your particular fighting style. Now, even though technically I have not 100% beaten Ghost of Tsushima, I'm still very close to getting it completed. In fact, depending on who you are, this is not going to be that difficult of a game to platinum. However, though, there are 2 other extra trophy slots aside from the main game. You have the New Game Plus, in which where you basically play through New Game Plus and do 2 particular things. One of them is either to completely purchase all of the extra stuff from this one character. I have not gotten into that yet, but I'll be sure to find out more once I get to that. And then, of course, beat through New Game Plus. Then there's Legends Mode. Legends Mode is a free-to-play online campaign that is in Ghost of Tsushima that they've decided to add into the game. Personally, in my personal opinion, I felt like this was unnecessary. However, though, that wasn't until I decided to dive into Legends Mode myself. And here's a cool thing about this. You do not have to have PlayStation Plus or even online access to even play Legends Mode. I mean, record, you have to have online connection just to download the thing, but you do not have to have engage online just to participate into Legends Mode. You can go through a single player campaign on your own or with some friends just to play through these Legends parts. This is actually pretty cool in my personal opinion, because normally whenever you have the introduction to online campaign, they are strictly online campaign. You do not access them by yourself or through single player mode. But in Legends case, you can actually in fact play these by yourself should you desire to, which is great because technically recently they did an announcement on these armor pieces. Technically you no longer have access to them now as of the release of this video, but you can in fact actually get new armor sets whenever you go through these story segments. Record, you have 4 different classes, and depending on which class you completed in particular setups, you get these 4 different setups. You know, you have the Hunter class, which basically has the armor set. This is reminiscence to Horizon Zero Dawn. You have the Samurai, which is that of Kratos from God of War. And then, of course, you have the Ronin, which represents an armor set that's from Bloodborne. And then my personal favorite, the Assassin, which definitely has the armor set from Shadow of the Colossus, which is an awesome armor set in my personal opinion. My only argument about that, I wish you can transfer these armor pieces over to the main campaign. You cannot do that, unfortunately, as of right now. Although I would like it if they release an update segment where you can in fact transfer these armor pieces over to the main game, which makes it that much more reason for why you would want to engage in Legends Mode. But Legends Mode themselves is actually pretty cool. Although there was someone that mentioned it online where the Legends AI is a little bit dumber than the main game, and I kind of feel like that might be somewhat true. But either way, you know, if you're wanting to play through Legends for a little bit, you can actually. It's actually there and it's free to play. And again, you don't have to be online to do this. You can just play it by yourself. And I do love that. I love the fact that they gave you that option should you desire to dive into Legends on your own. Personally, that's actually a pretty cool option to have, you know, an online mode to where you can either choose to take it on your own or to take it on with friends. That is actually a nice option in my personal opinion. Now, there is something else that I do want to go ahead and say, and that's the fact that technically, as of the timing of this recording, there's been rumors as well as some claiming that there's been confirmation for a sequel being made. And after being the main campaign to Ghost of Tsushima, I can definitely say for a fact that there may very well be a sequel being made of Ghost of Tsushima. And if so, I'm looking forward to it. I definitely would love to see how they're going to go about making the sequel involving Jin and his crew in Ghost of Tsushima 2. Definitely looking forward to that, because quite frankly, this game should have won Game of the Year. The way that it's set up, the way that it's built up, the way that it's overall landscape and stuff. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not normally the guy that normally does photo mode that much, but this is the most engaging that I have been with a game that has photo mode. I wasn't that intrigued with Kingdom Hearts 3's photo mode, but in this game's case, you can set it up however way you want to, set up the perfect atmosphere, the layout and everything. It's just done really, really well. I'm just mind blown by how the photo mode is its own individual sequence in the game, and yet it works so well. The entire game has reasons for why it won art direction, because it definitely deserves it. It is a beautiful landscape. Every part of the game is a new landscape entirely, a beauty, and is encapsulates you. You're just absorbed into this worldscape. You cannot help but just kind of walk around and kind of explore what you're even witnessing. You're seeing these landscapes far more beautifully than you ever would in any video game, and Sucker Punch nailed it to a T with this game. You've done really well with yourselves. You should be proud of yourself with this. So, in the events of these things, I know some of you are going to be surprised that I would even remotely say this, yet at the same time, some of you may not be as shocked. But Ghost of Tsushima, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. And I'm going to tell you why. Because this is better than Assassin's Creed. This is better than what it ever had been. The way that it's set up, the way that it's displayed. The missions aren't as long and engaging. They are relatively short and fun to engage with. Just being able to explore the area at your own freedom. Just everything in Genuine is perfectly well balanced. And I cannot stress this enough. I highly recommend it to anyone who is even remotely interested in wanting to dive into Ghost of Tsushima. If you are even remotely hesitant, you should not fear about it, because this does so well in representing itself as a samurai game, and technically, if you want to be more specific, as an Assassin's game, because the gameplay is better than Assassin's Creed. The story is so well in depth. The overall atmosphere is so well to look at. You kind of get yourself infused with Ghost of Tsushima. And in all honesty, if I could, I would love to write a haiku. But it's probably going to be crap. So here it goes. Beautiful as the cherry blossoms, as unforgiving as death. This game should have been Game of the Year. I mean, that's my haiku. If I could, I would write it. It would be crap, but that's my haiku, and I believe those words are exactly as it should be. And the way this game displays itself just does it so well, in my personal opinion. Again, highly recommended. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm going to go ahead and sign off and everything, but again, Ghost of Tsushima is definitely an awesome game. And just, oh man, there's nothing else that I can say except for just saying it's done well for itself. So, looking forward to the sequel, and definitely looking forward to seeing what else might come out of Ghost of Tsushima in the future. So anyway, guys, thank you so much. See you in the next video. Catch you guys later.